The Denver Broncos truly endured a season from hell in 2022. From poor coaching to injuries to uncontrollable, chaotic randomness not landing on their side of the coin, all combined to one of the more devastating seasons of failed expectations for any NFL team in recent memory. But enter Sean Payton, a skinny Russell Wilson, and potentially a clean bill of health. And maybe, just maybe, the Denver Broncos can be a bit of a post-hype sleeper in 2023. Welcome into the Broncos Deep Dive, everybody. A series here where we break down all 32 teams in the NFL, all leading up to the number one team in my power rankings. Today, the Denver Broncos break into the teens in those rankings, coming in at the 19th spot. In this video, we're going to talk about their offseason moves, break down this new coaching staff, what the scheme's going to look like here offensively and defensively. Then we're going to get into the roster. We'll rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league, and we'll wrap things up looking at their schedule and my win total expectations for the Broncos. Before we do all that, if you could do me a huge favor and just take a quick second to hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy way that really supports my channel. I'd really appreciate it. And if you do enjoy, do consider subscribing so you don't miss any of these deep dives as we go. But let's kick things off by looking at this team's offseason, their key departures and additions, and really anytime you bring in any new head coach, there's going to be some turnover, but especially a veteran head coach like Sean Payton, who, he knows veterans around the league. He knows what types of veterans he wants. He's going to bring in his guys, whether it's to run his scheme or to be kind of ambassadors or partial position coaches, if you will, down the depth chart. And that was definitely what we saw here. Plenty of turnover, but for what it's worth, the Broncos definitely had a good offseason. And I know we said that last year, but really, as we start by looking at their impactful departures, the only one of real note that you might have some concerns about, honestly, is going to be Draymond Jones on the interior of the defensive line. But they do bring in Zach Allen at a cheaper guaranteed price point, who's familiar with their new defensive coordinator, Vance Joseph. So, yes, there's a slight downgrade there, but, they did spend money at that position that they lost that key player at. Of course, Bradley Chubb as well is a key player, but, the team last year made that decision to trade him away. He wasn't there for the second half of last season anyway when this team was better. So beyond those two guys, they do lose the coaching staff, Nathaniel Hackett. This is the reason we changed this from big departures to impactful departures. It's impactful in the sense that, yeah, they need to find a new head coach, but needless to say, he is not someone they're going to miss here in Denver. He did not do a good job as head coach. I do think losing Ejiro Evero is a loss. He goes to Carolina. I think he did a great job last year, but they do bring in Vance Joseph, and we'll talk about what that means for the coaching staff momentarily here. But beyond that, Latavius Murray, a street free agent running back that played pretty well for this team. They do lose their starting left guard, Dalton Reisner, but that is another spot where they paid up to hopefully upgrade in getting Ben Powers. Then Graham Glasgow, veteran offensive line, who had to step in the event of injury last year, was okay. Going to be a backup for Detroit this year. And then their core special teamers as well. They're going to turn over punter Corliss Waitman and Brandon McManus, probably upgrading at punter with Riley Dixon and downgrading at kicker, going to Elliott Fry. A couple other smaller name losses that were much more like planned losses, if you will. Pair of rotational tight ends in Eric Saubert and Eric Tomlinson. Billy Turner on the offensive line. Deshaun Williams, a rotational interior defensive lineman that had a solid year for them last year. And then Ronald Darby, who just could not stay healthy, still a street free agent, by the way. But as I mentioned, this was a very good offseason. As we look at the additions that this team had, really everywhere that they lost talent, they added talent. So as far as the roster is concerned, running back should be improved this year. They're hoping to get Javonte Williams back. I do list him there doing some research before this video, I'll be honest, I didn't realize how bad his injury was and that their outlook for him isn't necessarily optimistic for this season. But that is why they bring in Samaje Perine, who is at worst a push with Latavius Murray and more of a 3-down presence. Then they do get Tim Patrick back, who missed all of last season, was one of those devastating camp injuries, I believe an ACL. They draft Marvin Mims in the 2nd round. They bring in Adam Troutman from New Orleans, who obviously Peyton is familiar with. On the offensive line, they sign Mike McGlinchey, the right tackle from the Niners, to a big deal. They get Garrett Bowles back, who only played the first 5 games of last season. They sign Ben Powers. So the offensive line, a massive focus for Sean Payton coming in here. We mentioned, as we look at the defense, we mentioned they bring in Zach Allen, the interior defensive lineman from Arizona. They also steal Frank Clark from Kansas City, or take Frank Clark, depending on which Chiefs fans you ask. He may or may not be missed. And then Riley Moss, the 3rd-round cornerback out of Iowa, might have to play some significant reps for this team this year. So he's also listed as a big addition. But some smaller additions as well. They signed backup quarterback Jarrett Stidham from the Raiders, who showed some flashes last season. Marquez Callaway, one of those ambassadors of the offense coming over from New Orleans for this receiving core. Chris Manhertz, a blocking tight end. Some late draft picks. Alex Forsythe. Drew Sanders, a 3rd-round pick. More of a smaller addition just because he's probably not going to play a ton in his rookie season, but a very nice draft pick there for the future, as is J.L. Skinner, a 6th-round pick out of Boise State, who likely won't be available early in the year as he got injured in the pre-draft process, among other various roster fillers that we will discuss as we break down this entire roster throughout this video. And as we pull up the positional movement chart for the Broncos offseason, really a good offseason, as I've said a couple times. You know, the coaching upgraded. How could it not be, going from Nathaniel Hackett to Sean Payton? Running back upgraded. As long as they get anything from Javonte Williams, I think that'll be an upgrade. Wide receiver on health alone is an upgrade, let alone adding a couple more pieces there. Offensive line obviously upgraded. Tight end slightly upgraded, bringing in Adam Troutman and Chris Manhertz. When you do look at the defense, I think it's basically the same, maybe a little bit worse. The interior defensive line was downgraded slightly. I think going from Draymond Jones to Zach Jones is a slight downgrade. They did lose Deshaun Williams, who was a solid rotational player for them last year. I put downgraded, but it's very slight. Everything else I'm going to leave as neutral. The only one you could maybe debate there would be the edge group, depending on how you want to consider the loss of Bradley Chubb. On the flip side, they do expect to get Randy Gregory back, who only played like 6 games for them last year. They do bring in Frank Clark, getting some of those younger edge guys into their next year in their development. I think it's going to be similar to the edge rush that they had last year. And then with the special teams, with the kicker downgrade from McManus to Elliott Fry, that is going to be viewed as a downgrade. But again, overall, a very positive offseason for the Broncos, where they are looking to recapture some momentum and hype that they failed to meet from last year. And really the biggest thing they did here, as we look at their coach and scheme breakdown, is trading that 1st-round pick that they got for Bradley Chubb. Somehow Bradley Chubb fetched a 1st-round pick, but sending that 1st-round pick to New Orleans for Sean Payton, from an investment perspective, that is the biggest thing that this team did this offseason, outside of maybe the Mike McGlinchey contract. But you know, this team saw what happened last year with Nathaniel Hackett in an offense that was often disoriented, led the league in pre-snap penalties, had receivers running into each other. The scheme just didn't match up with the skill sets. It was a complete unmitigated disaster last year. They did everything they could to make sure that that wasn't going to happen again, but not just that, to make sure that this could be a strength of this team. And I am optimistic about this. I think they succeeded in going from the bottom 5 of NFL head coaching to something much closer to the top 5. In fact, Sean Payton ranks here for me as the 6th best head coach in the NFL. And you go back a year and you'd be hard pressed to find a coach rankings that didn't have Sean Payton in the top 5. Now, he has to copy and paste all of the success and culture that he had in New Orleans. And it is a little bit of a what have you done for me lately league. So he drops like a spot or two until he can get back on top of the mountain there, so to speak. But obviously ranking him 6th before he's ever coached a game for this team is an immense amount of respect for Sean Payton and my expectations for what he can accomplish in time here. Sean Payton ranking as a top 5 head coach for all those years was completely justified because he is the rare coach that isn't just a CEO or he isn't just an offensive guru. He's both. You know, he's right there with guys like Sean McVay, Andy Reid, in terms of, yes, he can run the offense and, you know, implement his scheme and call the plays and all that stuff. But he also has the foresight to oversee the organization, steer the ship in the right direction. He can run a practice. He can set a culture. He can bring in and develop skill sets that fit his offense. Now, you will see that the team's overall ranking for coach and culture isn't quite as high. They are in tier 3, which is still good for overall coach and culture, which is basically that benefit of the doubt slider that these teams earn for these series. But I do think there's a little bit of repairing that Sean Payton's going to have to come in for the damage that Nathaniel Hackett and the previous regime did, and I think that's fair. But as I mentioned, he's also a great offensive mind, though maybe not someone that I would necessarily say is a brilliant play designer, like a Kyle Shanahan, for example, a Brian Dable. Because when you look at Sean Payton's scheme, you know, maybe 10 years ago, we may have looked at this offense that uses big-bodied slot receivers that'll, you know, get the running backs involved in the receiving game, bubble screens, spread, option, quick game, like a lot of those concepts maybe 10 years ago may have been viewed as transformative, but now we're in a league where those types of plays and personnel usage, it's very much widespread throughout the league. In a league where pretty much everyone runs either the Shanahan offense or Andy Reid's, especially pro spread scheme. You know, Payton's offense at this point in time is much more traditional, where in the modern landscape of the league, I would call it a pro-style offense. And like I said, I don't look at Sean Payton and been like, you know, oh my God, I can't believe he came up with that play. Like, that's a crazy new concept that the league's never seen before. No, I don't think you see a ton of that with Sean Payton, but what he does do better than pretty much any coach in the league is implement sound, proven plays with lots of pre and post snap checks that can provide answers to any coverage, paired with a varied run game that has answers to any different kind of front that he might see, whether that's counter or trap or just straight up power. He'll mix up his runs in his scheme as much as anybody else. And above all, he knows when to push what buttons and pull what levers, how to set plays up, how to anticipate a certain coverage based on defensive tendencies, and knowing when to call what to beat those coverages. As a straight up play caller, his feel for the game is sensational, and to go from Nathaniel Hackett to Sean Payton in that regard is such a ridiculous upgrade. But maybe even beyond the play calling side of things, just from like a fundamental level in terms of getting players to line up correctly, to play with discipline, to not jump off sides, to play fast, to run the right routes. Like, it's all just going to be so much more well-run. It's going to be a much more well-run operation here than it was with Nathaniel Hackett. That might be where this Broncos offense feels the biggest improvement, because this really did look like a bunch of theater kids that got together, that rehearsed, you know, the play for 2 days and then tried to show up on Broadway and perform. Like, that's what it looked like with this Broncos offense last year. No, this is going to be 3 months of actually rehearsing the play here in Denver with Sean Payton, if that analogy makes sense. So as with any coach going from point A to point B, you don't just copy and paste everything that they had established in their previous spot. The Broncos are going to rank in tier 2 for pass game coaching and tier 3 for run game coaching, whereas I think Sean Payton in his prime in New Orleans would be a tier 1 pass game coordinator and a tier 2 run game coordinator. And you're hoping that, in a year's time, Sean Payton is right back with kind of the full system, I suppose, for lack of a better term, to fully implement the different checks and assignments and what to look for, and as far as what the new assistant coaches need to coach. Like, all that stuff does need to be reassigned and redistributed throughout the entire organization, so that's why he kind of gets knocked down a little bit coming in. That's just kind of how I view a new head coach coming in. He just has work to do. It's not like he's just taking the New Orleans organization and planting it here in Denver, even if he's got a lot of familiar bodies there to help him smooth that process. For example, Joe Lombardi, who had a cup of coffee with the LA Chargers as their offensive coordinator. Infamous for the Chargers. Chargers fans will not miss Joe Lombardi, and if he ever takes control of the play calling here, you might have some concerns, but obviously he was in New Orleans for 13 years, and these two guys worked very well together. So as long as Sean Payton is in full control of the offense and calling the plays, I'm not going to have any hesitations about Joe Lombardi being here to help, identify whatever it is he's doing, whether that's, coverage tendencies, what he's seeing in the front to help out in the run game, whatever it is that Sean Payton has trusted with Joe Lombardi for the last, not the last 13 years, but from literally 2007 through 2020, these two guys have worked together. So I have no problems with them bringing in Joe Lombardi. And then another thing I really like about Sean Payton is he's not afraid to just hire a good defensive coordinator and let him run the show on defense. It helps Sean Payton stay focused on what he can do and allows the defensive coordinator to really thrive. And, we saw that with Dennis Allen for so long. And Vance Joseph, Broncos fans are familiar with him. He was the head coach here for a couple of years. And, he was a little bit underqualified to be a true head coach. But as that sort of defensive head coach, if you will, which is how the structure is going to be in place here, that's a very healthy spot for Vance Joseph. He went to Arizona after Denver, and I think he did a really good job, despite not having a ton of roster talent to work with. Thanks, Steve Keim. But seriously, especially last year, I think Vance Joseph took one of the worst defensive rosters in the NFL and turned them into an average, serviceable defense. And that's, to me, just as impressive as taking an average roster and turning it into a good defense, or a good roster and making it an elite defense. I really think he is a sound hire who's going to provide sound, good defensive coaching here. I'm not going to pound the table and say Vance Joseph is one of the best, brightest, most brilliant defensive minds in the league, but I think I know he's been around the league forever, and he's coached some really good defenses. So the Broncos are going to rank in that tier 3 as well of good NFL defensive coaching. It's a wide tier. I think it goes from 13th to 27th. We'll double check that later in the video when we get to the defense. It's just a tier of defensive coordinators that are going to be solid and not an issue for their team. And I think that's going to be Vance Joseph here. As far as what his scheme looks like, it's, for modern standards, it's a relatively traditional standard 3-4 defense. Now, we use 3-4-4-3 at this point more to describe how the coordinators utilize their edge rushers, whether they have their hand in the dirt or they're standing up. Everyone runs a 4-2 of some kind as their base defense, and Vance Joseph's no different, but he will rotate those edge rushers back into coverage to try and, disguise coverages and blitzes and confuse the quarterback. That's a little bit more the 3-4 tends to do that, and, he comes from a large part of, his coaching tree is with Wade Phillips, where Wade is one of the best 3-4 blitz designers in the league. The fire zones and all that, that's Wade Phillips at his best. So Vance has that background. He can dial up some good blitzes and get creative up front. And then on the back end, one thing I really like about Vance Joseph is I think he's shown that he will cater his coverages to, number one, his own personnel, He's not going to force his scheme onto his players, and he'll change up his coverages based on what he thinks his guys are best at. But he'll also game plan for his opponent as well and vary up his coverages. Now, last year in Arizona, where they had possibly the worst secondary in the NFL, they led the NFL in cover 3. They ran the cover 3 50% of the time. I think cover 2 as well was like 20%. So 70% of their coverage calls were just true zone, cover 3, or cover 2. That's a lot. That's a lot of zone, I think, in Denver this year with Pat Surtain and Mathis, who is more of a man guy than a zone guy. I expect this to be more of a man-heavy defense, which I think is very good news for the Broncos. It's a similar adjustment that Vic Fangio made in 2021. We know Vic wants to go man, but he looks at his defense and says, I got Pat Surtain. I should probably run a little bit more man coverage. So very curious to see what their coverage splits look like. But overall, I think it's a sound hire, and they're going to get good defensive coaching. Overall, the coaching has been massively upgraded. And if you're optimistic as a Broncos fan, this coach and the new schemes should be your number one source of optimism. Now, before we get into the roster breakdown, I got to tell you guys about the sponsor of this video, Underdog Fantasy, who just continues to up the game as the best place to play fantasy football. You're tired of sitting around waiting for your friends and family draft, and you've got that itch to go do a fantasy draft. Well, you can take out your phone, sign up using promo code TFG, and compete in Underdog Fantasy's Best Ball competition right now. Best Ball Mania is the biggest fantasy football contest ever. $15 million in prize pool. Yes, you heard that number correctly. It's draft, set it, forget it. No weekly moves, no trades. I love Best Ball. I never thought I would be huge on it, but since I've been working with Underdog and playing Best Ball, I love it, man. But you've also probably heard of Underdog's Pick'em contests, where you can string together player lineups, selecting higher or lower on player stats, where you can get up to 20 times your money when you win. And now they have season-long pick'ems, and until the 21st of July here, you can go and get basically a free selection on Patrick Mahomes' higher or lower 1 passing yards. So you can get that 20 times multiplier by only having to hit on 4 of your selections for season-long pick'em, which is a great way to play pick'em, unless you're a psychotic Broncos fan and you want to go lower on the half a passing yard. But yeah, that's all at Underdog Fantasy. You guys are going to love it. You support my channel in the process by using promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy. All right, let's get into the good stuff. The roster breakdown, where we are going to rank every single position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And that means we have to start with the quarterback, which to me, the Broncos here are unique in that this is the most difficult quarterback ranking I've had to assign to a team, I think, in the 6 years that I've been doing this series. I don't know what the hell to do with Russell Wilson. I can't remember a quarterback who's still it's not like Peyton Manning or Brett Favre where they just lost it physically. I still think Russell Wilson has physical tools, even if he's not in his prime. I can't remember a quarterback who I felt so confident about him being a top 10 quarterback to so confidently watching his film the next year and saying that's a bottom 5 quarterback. It was a complete shit show in Denver last year. Pardon my French, there's no other way to put it. And there is so much blame to go around, and throughout a film study I did late October and prepping for this video, even to this day, I have been trying to find out the answer of, is Russ cooked? And I still don't know the answer to that question, because I don't want to make all of the excuses in the world. Nobody wants to hear all of these excuses. But the reality is, the offensive line was a complete carousel last year of injuries and random players stepping in. You have receivers running into each other. You have a scheme that just wasn't even much of a scheme. It was like part McVay quick game, part Shanahan offense, part whatever Russ wanted to do. It was just, again, an unmitigated disaster from start to finish in Denver with Nathaniel Hackett. I didn't expect it to be nearly as bad as it was, but it was one of the worst coached offenses I've ever seen, let alone the amount of fumbled snaps and pre-snap penalties and holding calls that continue to put Russ in compromising drop back pass situations, and the complete lack of a run game that did that to him, in part because of injuries at running back. Those are all very real excuses. I'm always a firm believer that surrounding cast matters more than the general NFL fan tends to admit with quarterback play. That said, Russ is not free of blame. And for lack of a better way to describe it, we could get into his issues with his accuracy got worse. His pocket presence was much less consistently elite like it has been throughout his career. There was more situations where he's bailing from clean pockets or not feeling out the pressure. The decision making was much more erratic, where he's pressing, he's forcing balls into double teams, he's not seeing open wide receivers throughout his progressions. That's just the starting point for areas where Russell Wilson struggled last year. Overall, though, it was straight up just, for lack of a better term, a lack of consistency with Russell Wilson. Because there were moments in individual games, third quarters, fourth quarters, first quarters, full games once or twice throughout the year, where he looked like the old Russell Wilson. You started to feel that hope. But when you put a inconsistent quarterback inside the structure of an offense that is a literal tornado, it's going to spit out complete chaotic randomness, which I described in the intro. And that's what this offense was last year. And trying to evaluate the quarterback in that offense, whether it's Russell Wilson, whether it's Tom Brady, or whether it's, fucking Kendall Hinton playing quarterback, I don't care what you say, you're not getting a fair opportunity as the quarterback in that offense. So for me, with Russell Wilson, I consistently see him ranked in the bottom 12 for quarterbacks heading into next year. And I understand you watched the film last year and that's what you saw and that's where you want to rank him. I'm much slower to react in that way. A year ago, I did think he was a top 10 quarterback very confidently. Wouldn't have hesitated. And most people wouldn't have hesitated either. Even if he showed minor signs of regression in Seattle in that last year, still had amazing moments for the Seahawks. So for me, Russ, the Broncos, they rank 13th right now. And that's at quarterback. And that's like a placeholder ranking. I put that question mark icon next to him in the graphic there because I just don't know. If he plays like he did last year, this team's season's going to be lost. He's going to be a bottom 8 quarterback in the NFL, and the Broncos will have made one of the worst trades in NFL history, stuck with a contract that they never should have given him before he played a snap for them. But Sean Payton's coming in. The receivers are healthier. The offensive line's going to be better. Why the hell couldn't Russell Wilson play like a top 10 quarterback again when he was just doing that a year or two ago? Again, extremely difficult to rank Russell Wilson. I'm just going to say I'm cautiously optimistic that he can be a top third of the league quarterback this year. And I'm not trying to ignore his own flaws last year, but it's just going to be extremely difficult for him to be that bad again when I think everything else around him is going to be much more professional. The last thing I do need to say with Russ, though, is while I think the offense overall will be better ran, I think there is a potential clash of coach and quarterback in terms of scheme here. Russ has never been known for his ability to operate the quick game, to get the ball out, to read the middle of the field, attack the intermediate on those digs. You think about, Drew Brees, Michael Thomas at their best. It's Michael Thomas running a 10-yard dig over the top of the linebackers. And if there's a heavy criticism of Russ, it's that because of his height and his play style, he doesn't always play in that structure from the pocket in the drop back passing game. He's a little bit better on it in play action where it's more simplified reads. But between that and the quick game, where over his career he hasn't been a very good quick game quarterback, but I think in the second half of last year in Nathaniel Hackett's offense that had a lot of quick game concepts, I thought Russ actually looked a lot better. getting that ball out. So I'm less worried about the quick game, more worried about his ability to attack that intermediate part of the field, specifically on like digs and shallow posts and stuff, which they will run in Sean Payton's offense. So that's going to be a specific part of his game that we're going to need to see evolution. And just playing from the pocket in general as well, because he is an aging quarterback. He's not going to be able to lean on those crazy Russell Wilson play extension moments that have gotten him to this point in his career. But as far as the backup room is concerned, you bring in Jarrett Stidham, which is a fascinating signing, highly recruited guy out of Auburn. For what it's worth, his play style reminded me of Tony Romo when he came out. Not that I thought he was going to be Tony Romo, but he is a toolsy quarterback. He's got a strong arm and the athletic tools. He's had 5 years of NFL development in a Josh McDaniels offense, which isn't entirely unlike Sean Payton's offense, so it should be a pretty familiar scheme for him. I'm not going to sit here and predict Jarrett Stidham becomes a starting quarterback in the NFL, but I will just say that crazier things have happened, and he looked like at least a high-end backup when he stepped in for the Raiders last season. You got Jarrett Guarantano, developmental strong-arm quarterback, and then Ben DiNucci as well, who started some games for the Dallas Cowboys and was recently starting games in the XFL. Might be their kind of third quarterback, emergency quarterback there as Guarantano develops. But let's take a look at the weaponry here. Also ranking inside the top 20, 19th for weaponry. And this is one of the more complete wide receiving cores in the league as far as depth and really a wealth of skill sets and talents are concerned. So Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy are kind of your 1A, 1B, whichever order you want to put them in. To me, I'm having Sutton as the 1A and Jeudy as the 1B, but both very different skill sets. Sutton is going to be much more of your X wide receiver on the outside, that big-bodied ball winner. He's smooth, though, for his size. In terms of his athleticism, he reminds me so much of Allen Robinson. He always has. Hasn't necessarily shown the consistency with his ball skills that, like, prime Allen Robinson did. He has insane flashes with, amazing catches and contested catch situations. But it has been 3 years, however, due to an injury in 2020, some bad quarterback play. 2019 is the only year in his career where he was over 50% in contested catch conversion percentage. So it's been 3 years since he got over 50%, and 60% is kind of the check for like a premium X wide receiver in the league. 42% the last 2 years is not horrible. And it's not that that's the only way that he wins, but he's not what Jerry Jeudy is as a route runner, right? He's not even what like Marvin Mims is going to be as a true separator type. So like I think he's a very good wide receiver, even can be a 1A, assuming you have a Jerry Jeudy and a Tim Patrick. Like I think this is a very serviceable wide receiver group, but if he wants to take that next step to be in that cluster of like true top X's in the league, Mike Evans, T. Higgins, Mike Williams, it's going to be getting back to that 2019 form, his second year, where he's coming down with closer to 60% of those contested catches being that true ball winner on the outside. So that's the biggest area I'm looking for him, especially with Russell Wilson, who wants to launch the ball down the field. Be that DK Metcalf wearing number 14 for Russ. Go get the ball. Because say what you want about Russ, but he's going to give you those chances down the field. But then you got Jerry Jeudy, again, to me, as either your 1A or 1B, whichever you want to go with. I'm not going to really argue it. And he's the one that's really building up the hype here because of the way he came on in the second half of last year. He really felt like he was starting to develop that kind of Tyler Lockett chemistry with Russell Wilson. He started to look Jerry Jeudy's way much more often, which was smart because Jerry Jeudy, I still believe, is one of the 10 best separators at the position in the NFL. His ability to accelerate into his routes, to shake defenders at the breaking point in his routes, to set up different routes with deception, to win on double moves, to get open as a vertical threat, it's all there. What isn't there with Jerry Jeudy is a large catch radius, so you have to be an accurate passer, and with Russell Wilson having those drop-offs in accuracy last year, it certainly didn't help. But beyond that, he is a putrid contested catch guy. Like, he's not Tyler Lockett in terms of, I'm going to throw a moon ball to you and go track that thing over your shoulder. That's really not where Jerry Jeudy thrives. He's a true route runner type. Career contested catch percentage, 36.6% on Jerry Jeudy, and I'm not expecting that to really grow. So if Judy's going to thrive here, it's going to be much more the offense is sharp, Russ is sharp within this scheme, and his timing and chemistry with Jerry Jeudy is exceptional. I think the upside with Russ and Jeudy in this offense is absolutely there. I think the upside for Jeudy to lead this team in receiving yards is absolutely there. Now, I will say for fantasy football, with Underdog Fantasy, I do think Jerry Jeudy is this team's leading receiver this year because of how Tim Patrick will eat into Courtland Sutton's target share a little bit. Because Tim Patrick and Sutton are a little bit redundant and they're both good options for Russ, we didn't get to see what Tim Patrick and Russ would look like together, but Tim Patrick is actually a more reliable vertical ball winner than Sutton, even if they're both pretty good in that area. Patrick just has a little bit more of that my ball bitch mentality. Now, Sutton's a better overall player. He's a better athlete. He's a better route runner and separator. So if you want to run crossing routes and digs and slants and all that stuff, he'll be more involved in that department. Honestly, in terms of fantasy football, like, I'm staying away from this group almost entirely. I think Jeudy has a pretty solid season, but he's going in like the 4th round on Underdog right now. I do think that's a little bit too high. If I'm drafting anybody, it's probably Courtland Sutton in like the 10th round, which is, I do think, a little bit too low. But back to real football here, like, this is just going to be a really good group. I know 19th doesn't sound crazy or anything, but there's so many great groups of weapons in the league. And I would say the Broncos are closer to being a great group of weapons than they are to being an average one, even if they rank 19th, if that makes sense. You also have to mention how Sean Payton is going to try to find that big-bodied kind of slot receiver in his offense, and a lot of times that will be Greg Dulcich, but considering Sutton and Patrick do have a little bit of redundant skill sets, I am curious, instead of just having them both be kind of double X wide receivers, which skill set wise, that's where both Patrick and Sutton are at their best, is just working the sidelines as an X. I am curious if Sean Payton might see either Sutton or Tim Patrick as kind of that Marquise Colston, who can line up, stretch the seam from the slot, be a mismatch problem. Difficult to say whether that could be Sutton or Patrick. I think both could do that, and it's going to be something fascinating to keep an eye on. But of course, Greg Dulcich is going to also be viewed in that mold. It's what he did last year for this team. It's what he did at UCLA. He's much more receiver than he is tight end, Greg Dulcich. Really fast, 4.5 speed. He can stretch the seam. He can win tough balls down the field. I think he showed more of that in his rookie season in the NFL than he even did at UCLA. Explosive guy after the catch, though not necessarily creative or overly powerful as a runner. But he really did show a lot in his rookie season, even more than I was expecting. I compared him to Robert Tonyan coming out, and you saw some of that, but he is more explosive as a player and has a higher upside than that guy. Gonna be fun to see how they utilize him here. You know, Sean Payton and this offense has always been able to shelter poor blocking tight ends, and that's what Greg Dulcich is. In fact, he was possibly the worst hand in the dirt blocking tight end in the NFL last year, and that showed up at his college tape. He is more receiver than he is tight end, but you look at Juwan Johnson recently in New Orleans, you look at Jimmy Graham way back in New Orleans, there is a real upside with Greg Dulcich inside this offense if they can kind of find out how to tap into that with Greg and with Russell's skill set. As you get into the depth a little bit more with the receivers, you know, Marvin Mims gets brought in the 2nd round, which is very fascinating to me because you do have 3 good starters in place already. Honestly, I think as long as Sutton, Jeudy, and Patrick are all healthy, we're not going to see a lot of Marvin Mims this year. I think this was much more looking down the road of, okay, Tim Patrick's going to be 30, just coming off a big injury. Jerry Jeudy's coming up on a contract in a big year. Courtland Sutton has had a hard time consistently being available for this team over the last few years. I think they look down the road a year and say, Marvin Mims, he could be our slot guy in the future. He could be, he could be a Z, a flanker in the future. We're probably going to lose one of these starters in a year, and Marvin Mims can kind of slide in. To me, that's much more of what that pick is about, and I like that pick a lot more for that. As a year one contributor, I wasn't quite as high on Marvin Mims. I like a lot of his skills. He is excellent at tracking the deep ball. He does have a little bit more of that kind of Tyler Lockett-esque ability to brush off contact down the field with really good body control and deep ball tracking ability that Russ has worked so well with in the past. All of that in a way that really Jerry Jeudy doesn't have. But I think in terms of running a complete route tree and consistency with his hands and even just overall athleticism, I think he left a little bit to be desired. I'm not saying he's a bad athlete, but for a slender, undersized wide receiver, he's definitely not a true burner. So I wasn't super high on Marvin Mims, but at the end of the second round, I was like, all right, I can see him in a Sean Payton offense being a useful player down the road. But I really don't think, as long as these guys stay healthy, that he's going to make much of an impact. Neither do I with KJ Hamler. I don't think it's going to happen at this point. The availability's been a concern. His play on the field has been a concern. I liked him coming out, but there hasn't been a lick of development, unfortunately. Marquez Callaway gets brought in as the sixth or fifth wide receiver here. Another kind of insurance policy here for Sean Payton. He's been a good wide receiver for New Orleans. He's had to be their number 3, even their number 2 at times. Hell, he's probably had games where he had to be their number 1 with all the injuries they've endured in New Orleans. But he's kind of a really poor man's Tim Patrick. Not this crazy separator, but can come down with tough balls down the sideline, can line up on the outside and make some plays. So as depth, that's a very solid signing. He also knows the offense and can kind of be in that room whispering in these guys' ears like, hey, Sean likes it this way. He wants you to, get to this landmark on this play, not there. All that kind of stuff. He'll be useful there. Also, Kendall Hinton's still here, man. I think a position battle here is going to be KJ Hamler versus Kendall Hinton, honestly. Hinton had some drops last year pop up, but he's been a better slot receiver than KJ Hamler. I don't think you can even really argue that. Not quite the athlete, but he's gone from a meme who had to start at quarterback from the practice squad as a wide receiver in the COVID year to he made some plays for this team last year. So he's a guy that I think could threaten KJ Hamler's roster spot here. And if he gets cut, I would like to see him picked up, getting an opportunity to compete in the slot somewhere else. I think he's shown that he can play. He can run routes and do some stuff after the catch. Smart guy, a quarterback in college, and I think a good worker. So I do like Kendall Hinton, definitely a guy I'm pulling for. They have some other interesting depth. Lil Jordan Humphrey, he's kind of a quasi tight end. He's a big-bodied receiver. He's slow as hell, but he's done some stuff for New Orleans. When Juwan Johnson kind of broke out in New Orleans, that kind of wiped away Lil Jordan Humphrey's path to relevancy, if you will, as that big-bodied slot wide receiver. But I like Sean Payton bringing him in, kind of giving him that opportunity again. Not a clear receiver on this guy to be that big-bodied slot / tight end. So if he makes this team, wouldn't be stunned with Hamler or Hinton getting cut. The rest of these guys are probably practice squad guys. They did draft Washington last year as kind of a return man, but it's a crowded room. It'd be tough for him to make it. The tight end depth as well is pretty damn deep. I mean, they bring in Adam Troutman, who's going to be more of their Y tight end, much more of a real functional blocker than Greg Dulcich. So if there's going to be a little bit of a holdup on Dulcich having that true breakout season, Troutman is going to get in the way of that a little bit because of the blocking aspect of things. They do have to get a little bit more creative if they're going to make Greg Dulcich a consistent part of the passing game, because they do want to run the ball under center. They do want to have a inline blocking tight end that can hold up against a defensive end, and that's Adam Troutman. And Troutman is functional in the receiving game. He's got solid hands. He's solid after the catch, solid athlete, classic Y tight end option there. They also bring in Chris Manhertz, veteran tight end who's a good blocker. I imagine he'll be out there in short yardage situations as a blocker. And then you still have Albert O here. I mean, he might be someone you want to make trade calls about because definitely didn't take that step up last year. There was a lot of hype for him. Very few flashes in his game, but he's 6'5", 250 pounds, runs in the 4.5s. But consistency with him going back to his time at Missouri has been an issue, whether it's drops or polish on his routes or the blocking. At this point in his career, you got to develop. You got to question if he's ever going to develop. But still, there as a tight end 4 is pretty solid. Even Tommy Hudson has gotten some snaps in the NFL, but he probably will be a practice squad guy. As far as the running backs in the receiving game, to me, it's a rather inconsequential group. Javonte is very Kareem Hunt-esque when he gets the ball on screens and dump-offs and stuff, but drops haven't, drops have been there for him. I'll just leave it like that. The route running isn't anything crazy, but just kind of manufacturing touches for him. In the receiving game, we know what he can do after the catch. I'll talk more about Javonte and his injury stuff momentarily, but they also bring in Samaje Perine to a decent veteran contract. Really good pass protector, secure hands, can do some stuff in the screen game and the dump-off game, but again, not a mismatch problem or an impact in the receiving game. The one guy I'd keep an eye on for, if it's third down and you want a guy to run a wheel route or an angle route out of the backfield or an option route, which they're going to run a ton of, or at least they want to because that's where Alvin Kamara thrived, Tyler Beatty would be that dude. I was surprised how late he went in the draft. I think 6th round to Baltimore. Horrible scheme fit in Baltimore with an offense that doesn't throw to their running backs and needs big backs for their run game. He gets cut and shows up in Denver and got on the field in the receiving game and made some plays. And it's like, hey, yeah, that's Tyler Beatty, the guy that I had almost an identical grade on than I did on James Cook. Cook was a little bit higher by a twitch because he's faster. But seriously, Tyler Beatty, go watch his Missouri highlights. He is a legit threat out of the backfield. So I've got my eyes on him, especially if Javonte can't get healthy. If they want someone to be Alvin Kamara, well, they're going to be Alvin Kamara, but if you want him to do some of the stuff that Kamara can do in terms of route running, Tyler Beatty's the guy on this roster that can do that. It's not Tony Jones either, who's more of a straight line power back type. But yeah, there's your weaponry. They rank 19th. It's a really good group. I really don't have any questions that this group's going to help this offense do what they want to do. They're rather injury-proof because they run 6 or 7 deep with the receivers especially, but tight end as well is deep. So while they don't have that alpha or an elite presence that most of the top 10 teams do, even the top 12 teams do, I'm not worried about this group of weapons. If this team doesn't meet their expectations, it's going to be other aspects of this team. But now let's talk a little bit more about these running backs as runners of the football. And they're going to rank 21st in the NFL at running back. And I'll be honest, I had to lower this as I did a little bit more research on Javonte Williams. The ACL injury was early season, week 5. And I was like, yeah, he'll be back. That's a long time to recover from an ACL. But a lot of respected, sports doctors have pointed out that his injury was about as bad as an ACL injury can get because it went. I can't remember. I think most ACL injuries, basically the knee's going forward when it tears. This one, the knee was going backwards when it teared. Is the very elementary explanation I have for you on that. But basically, his knee got completely blown up, and in a similar way to J.K. Dobbins' injury, and we've seen the lack of explosiveness from J.K. Dobbins as well, and there's very real worry that he won't be full go this year, that if he gets back out there, he won't be the same explosive Javonte Williams, and at this point, I am going to trust those opinions, especially when we've seen a couple of guys around this age, Cam Akers and J.K. Dobbins, just not come back to the players they were when they got hurt. And I'm very worried about that with Javonte. It sucks because when he's out there, he looked like he was heading towards that trajectory of being a top 10 running back in the NFL. I mean, everyone that enjoyed Dameon Pierce last year, that was Javonte Williams in his rookie year. That bowling ball of needles running style, he breaks more tackles literally than basically any running back in the league. Did it in college, set PFF records for missed tackles forced. And the second he got to the NFL, his missed tackle force rate was, if not the best in the NFL, I think it was top 3. I'd have to double check that. But for a rookie, any of those you'll take. So all of that, the vision, the power, he's in his healthy form. He's got solid speed as well. So like, he's going to be a X factor for this team in terms of can he get back to speed, because without him playing like he did early in his career, it's a bunch of meh and mediocrity and much closer to the bottom 5 in the league in running back than it is, 21st. So difficult to kind of truly rank that. Not to slander Samaje Perine. I think he did a lot of good stuff in Cincinnati. He earned this contract. He's a poor man's Javonte Williams. He himself is a bowling ball of needles. He will bounce off tacklers. He's got good vision. He is a really good athlete. Once upon a time, Samaje Perine broke the NCAA record for rushing yards in a game. He put up 427 on Kansas. That's insane. Not to say he has insane upsides, because he's not that fast. He's not that quick, but very good runner. I like the signing, like paid him basically nothing. Great insurance policy for Javonte Williams. He can do everything Latavius Murray did for them last year and a little bit more in the receiving game. So like, he's capable, but in a league where pretty much everybody has stud running backs, Samaje Perine would not necessarily be viewed in my eyes as a stud, more of just like good, capable starter. Beyond that, we talked about Beatty's impact in the receiving game, but I don't see much there as a runner. Tony Jones is someone to keep an eye on in a world where Javonte Williams isn't available for this team, because Jones was someone that was starting to get some carries in New Orleans under Sean Payton before things kind of got ugly with that offense. And he's got some tools as a between the tackles runner. I think he makes this team and could surprise. Someone to keep an eye on if like you're in a deep fantasy league and it's looking like Javonte's not going to be available. If anything happens to Samaje Perine, it's going to be Tony Jones's backfield, at least in the run game. As far as the multiplier that they get from the quarterback here, it's above average. You know, they're not going to run a million read options with Russell Wilson, but with his drop-off as a passer, I do think they'd be silly not to keep the defense honest with read option. So he's kind of in a above average ranking here, right there with like how the Cowboys use Dak Prescott. Like, yeah, maybe once or twice a game they'll run a read option. He can get 12 yards on it, then he'll slide, and they'll keep that backside defensive end honest on inside zone. Like that's got real value. But we're not talking about, Jalen Hurts or Justin Fields or Josh Allen here. But let's talk next about who's blocking for all these guys. And it's a really improved, good group here. They're going to rank overall as the 13th best offensive line, 11th in pass protection, and 13th in run blocking. It's a very balanced unit with really no weak links, especially no weak links in pass blocking. So from left to right, at left tackle, Garrett Bowles, total stud, kind of hinges on top 10 for left tackles. One of the more balanced guys as well. Like, I really don't have a bad thing to say about him. He's a great athlete. He's established himself as a really physical, nasty, athletic run blocker. He's only gotten better throughout his career in pass protection. There's not a ton to really add or say about Garrett Bowles other than get healthy, come back, be the franchise left tackle, and they'll feel very good about that. At left guard, they are swapping out Dalton Risner for Ben Powers. An interesting swap because, Powers is like 110% of what you had in Risner. Neither are good athletes. In fact, Risner is probably a little bit better as a run blocker, though it's close. Just because neither of these guys are great people movers or all that fast off the ball. But Ben Powers especially is a very polished pass protector. Had a breakout year last year for Baltimore, earned a huge contract extension. He's basically just going to be a stone wall at left guard that if you try to run behind him, it's difficult to get that wall to move forward 2 yards to create movement off the line, but it's definitely going to be nice to have that wall in place in terms of pass protection, if that makes sense. He's got anchor against the power rush. He can slide left to right and handle finesse. He's just a very good signing and a plus pass protector at left guard. At center, Lloyd Cushenberry, one of these players that did get hurt last year. They had to go to Graham Glasgow. Cushenberry has gotten better year in, year out. He was one of my bigger draft misses in recent memory. I had a 6th-round grade on him. I was just wrong. He came into the league and, wasn't great, but I was wrong about his upside and how he was going to develop. He's really been a good pass protector over the last 20 starts or so of his. Anchors extremely well. He's got good foot speed to slide left to right. Where you want to see him take strides is going to be, especially as a run blocker, where he's just not always showing the best feel as a run blocker. I don't question the play strength or the athleticism. To me, it's much more about, is he consistently getting that leverage? Is he consistently kind of timing up those combo blocks, whether it's, taking over a double team or leaving a double team? Does he have that feel? That's a part of his game that I think has left a lot to be desired, or just straight up sticking his hands inside and sustaining blocks. Like it's just hasn't been very pretty as a run blocker, but as your worst player here, that's better than most teams can say on the offensive line. And they'll be happy to hopefully get him back healthy. At right guard, Quinn Miners. If I had to pick a breakout player for this team, it's going to be Quinn Miners, and I'm still putting together my list for my top 10 breakout players for the 2023 NFL season, and Quinn Miners will absolutely make that list. I loved Quinn Miners. I had even had him in first-round mock drafts when he came out, was just so high on him as a prospect. I liked his floor as a capable offensive lineman, and that's kind of what he's done from the beginning here, but loved his upside even more. He's literally one of the most athletic interior offensive linemen to come out in recent memory. I'm convinced that he was literally found in a carriage floating down the river in the woods of Wisconsin by some farm family, because he trained in the woods for the combine. He is just a throwback offensive lineman, but he's a super athlete on top of that. So one of my favorite players in the league. And last year, you started to see some of that upside. Some of his dominant blocks in the run game, some of his pass protection reps against guys like Chris Jones, where you can really see it all coming together. Him really settling in at right guard, where it wasn't certain where he was necessarily going to play coming out of college. Also, he just has that thing that some guards have, call it factor, call it game awareness, whatever. It's that thing that Quentin Nelson has, where he'll find blocks that you wouldn't expect any player to find, seeking out work or contorting his body to find weird leverage just to be effective on any block he can, even if he's out of position. It hasn't always been perfect coming out of Division III football. There was always going to be a transition period, but I think year 3 here is going to be it for Quinn Miners to really become a top 10 guard in the NFL. I think that highly of where he could be a year from now, especially with a better cast around him and more consistent offensive design. I know that's optimistic. We'll have to revisit that in a year and see where he's at, but and maybe I'm just a Quinn Miners homer, but that's how I feel about him. And then at right tackle, a lot of people screamed overpay when this team went out and got Mike McGlinchey, but you look at some of the players they had to trot out on this offensive line, how often some of these positions turn into complete turnstiles last year. It makes a lot more sense why they would bring in and pay Mike McGlinchey, who, yes, has deficiencies as a pass protector. He is 6'7", 6'8". He doesn't have the best hand usage. He can get top heavy, and he can lose quite bad in pass protection at times, specifically against power. So when he's going against Khalil Mack, Abosa, Max Crosby is going to be a matchup definitely to keep an eye on here. Give him some help, Make sure you're chipping bull rushers that are lined up against Mike McGlinchey so that they can't get a running start to just tee off on Mike McGlinchey's chest. If you're doing that, and I think this team will do that because they're smart and Sean Payton's smart, you can definitely live with him most of the time in pass protection. And he's shown year-to-year growth there as well. A couple years ago, he was a liability. Recent years, it's been much more he'll have some ugly losses, but he's better than what Denver was trotting out at tackle last year. And then he's a dominant run blocker. He's a headhunter on the move. Honestly, if this was still kind of that wide zone based run game, I'd have him in that star range of run blocking. Right now, he's in that stud tier with an 84 grade as a run blocker, because I do think there's a difference between what he can do as a head up blocker versus when you get him on the move in those wide zones Shanahan offenses. So maybe a slight downtick there, but still a dude that has the tenacity, the play strength, and athleticism to be a great run blocker. So that rounds out a really good group of starting five. You're hoping this can be a healthier group than what they had last year. You bring in McGlinchey, you bring in Powers, and if Miners can take a step up with a more sound group around them, this can easily be a top 10 offensive line and really help this offense go to work. I am concerned about the depth. You do have Cam Fleming. It's funny how Sean Payton is going from having James Hurst, who's been like one of the best sixth man offensive linemen, backup tackles in the league for years, right there with Cam Fleming. It's like Cam Fleming, James Hurst, the guy in Washington, Cornelius Lucas. Like, these guys are all kind of like those. They're like the Case Keenum, the Andy Dalton of backup quarterbacks for tackles, where like, yeah, they come in and you might not get the dominant play that you have from your starter, but he's probably better than some of the other tackles starting around the league. So I do like Cam Fleming. Not a whole lot of experience as a guard, though, and their interior depth is piss poor. Quinn Bailey has played a couple games for this team. He's the one guy that might have some promise. Luke Wattenberg played for them last year, was really bad. Alex Forsythe, a seventh-round pick at center. I think he's an okay pass protector, but no athleticism in the run game, and a rookie that you'd be a little bit more worried about. They have Kyle Fuller. Not the cornerback, but it might as well be the cornerback Kyle Fuller playing center for them, because when this Kyle Fuller has tried to pass protect, it's been about the same result as a 190-pound cornerback. So, yeah, don't love that interior depth at all. I guess keep an eye on Will Sherman out of Colorado. Was an interesting kind of undersized tackle prospect. Maybe something there. He hasn't really played yet. Tackle depth isn't great either. Isaiah Prince, pretty good run blocker. Like, he's an athlete, but he's been a putrid pass protector at Ohio State when he was competing for a spot on a horrible Bengals O-line in 2019. 2021, the Bengals put him in there, and it was no different. Why would that be different here? I don't know. Maybe as a sixth, like you bringing him in on a jumbo package, you can move some guys. But beyond that, I wouldn't want him playing. The one guys I am interested in is a really good undrafted pickup in Alex Palczewski. I thought he was a draftable prospect. I thought he was honestly one of the more technically polished tackles in the draft. A guy that's had a long journey to get back to health at Illinois, but looked really good in his final year. I think it was a sixth year for him. I expect him to make this team. He's a much better player than Isaiah Prince, and I think he could be their best backup guard if Cam Fleming can't play guard. So that was a really good pickup for them. The Broncos in general, despite not having a lot of draft capital, I think did a really good job kind of bringing in impactful players in this rookie class, whether it was through the draft picks or the undrafted guys. But when you look at their run blocking skill players, it's a slight boost to the run blocking. You know, basically everybody that's on the field other than Greg Dulcich and I guess Jerry Jeudy are pretty good run blockers. Troutman, Sutton, Tim Patrick, a good fullback, and Michael Burton that's going to follow Sean Payton over here. So they have a bunch of guys that are going to really get after it. Bowles, Miners, McGlinchey, Troutman. But you do have a couple weak links as run blockers. You know, if you're going to have a weak link, I suppose you'd take it as a run blocker as opposed to a pass blocker. But, you know, Ben Powers, Lloyd Cushenberry, not getting a ton of push there. And Greg Dulcich will inevitably have to do some blocking. And honestly, it ain't great when he has to do that. So if there's weaknesses, it's a couple spots as run blockers. But overall, a very good offensive line. So let's recap the offense. They're going to rank 17th overall for offense, which is obviously better than where they were last year. They were dead last in points scored last year. But they moved the ball better than that, and I think they'll move the ball a lot better than that this year, being much more closer to league average. 13th in the passing game, very much dependent on what you get from Russell Wilson there, honestly. If Russ plays like the 26th best quarterback again, I still think they'll be better than they were last year, but you're not going to be probably top 20 in passing game there. And then the run game came out 25th. I know people following the series are like, what the hell? The Panthers are just 25th. Well, I did have to lower the running back grade with my research on Javonte, which I wasn't really fully aware of. I put these rankings together before I start the series. There's naturally going to be new information, and I watch film and, change my opinions on guys as I do that. I even put that in the description. Like, these rankings are subject to slide 1 or 2 spots, and this is an example of that. The Panthers are going to climb up to the 24th run game with Javonte sliding down. I still think, just like what we said about the Panthers, like that does sound a little bit low for a team that's going to have pretty good run blocking here. It's just that lack of dynamism, whether that's from an elite running back or an elite rushing threat at quarterback, that kind of puts them much more in this tier of like still capable run games. It's not going to really hold this team back, but I don't think they have that fear factor of a run game that a lot of teams do. But yeah, 17th for overall offense is significantly improved. Gonna put this team in a much better spot to finish games up, to maintain leads, which can help this defense out and help Russell Wilson play better and hopefully return some value on that big contract that they gave him after trading away a couple first-round picks. But let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball now, Vance Joseph's unit here, and we're going to start by looking at this defensive line. It is an incredibly, I don't even want to say average, because they're nowhere close to the 16th defensive line in the league. But in terms of where each individual player lays across the board, it's just an average group. There's not a much better way to put it. Like, they have a combination of adequate football players, but no one that really puts the fear of God in you at all. If there's anybody that you're somewhat afraid of here, it is Randy Gregory, if he's there. He's had insane amounts of availability concerns throughout his career. Whether it's off-field or injury, you can only just kind of close your eyes and pray that you get 14 games out of Randy Gregory. You go back throughout his career, starting in 2015, these are his snap counts. And I'm not kidding. 245, 66, didn't play in 2017, 522, career high in 2018, didn't play in 2019, 270, 477, and 187 last year for Denver. Now, the NFL has loosened up their marijuana policy. Supposedly, you only have to test at the start of the year, and then they won't test you again. But I think Randy Gregory might be subject to more tests because of his issues in the past. It's a mess. They're hoping that he's available for them. They paid him a ridiculous amount of money to be there for him, and let's keep their fingers crossed that they can get him, because he is the best pass rusher they have by far. When he's on the field, he's a dynamic rusher. He's got the length. He's added a power rush to his game. He's got bend. He's got inside counters. He really is an instinctive, uber athletic rusher that when he's been on the field over the last few years, he's been a game changer, even for the Broncos in the 5 games he played last year. So, I do think they'll make him a part of a rotation with all of this edge depth that they have, some of the youth they have here. Try to keep him fresh and healthy. Just say, hey, don't worry about run defense. Just come in, passing downs, get after the quarterback, and stay off the weed, and we're good. We'll see how that goes. They also bring in Frank Clark to provide more, I don't want to say insurance, but immediate capability here for a team that is trying to win, because everybody else is kind of developing, for lack of a better term. Frank Clark is an established starting NFL pass rusher. I don't even really feel like I've just kind of lost the energy of calling Frank Clark overrated and, going at it with Chiefs fans. He's fine. He can get after the quarterback. He'll get you, about a career pressure rate of about 10%, which is a completely average starting pass rusher. Not the best run defender. He can, turn it on and off. He's just kind of a, plays the run when he wants to kind of guy. Now, another guy that they're hopefully going to rotate, keep him fresh, get the best out of him. I don't hate the signing. They gave him 1 year, $5 million, just kind of a classic veteran minimum, much closer to what he should be getting paid than like the $20 million that the Chiefs were paying him. Not a bad signing by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not expecting him to make a substantial impact on this defense. The two guys you're really going to keep an eye on here are Baron Browning and Nick Bonito, who, I kid you not, are one of the most athletic edge rush duos in the league. Baron Browning, a freak athlete out of Ohio State, very similar to like Micah Parsons in that he was probably misutilized at Ohio State, where they had other linebackers. They didn't really have a role for him. They probably should have just put him on the edge and let him go to work there. Even Denver flirted with him as an off-ball in his rookie year. But last year, they put him at edge, let him get after the quarterback, and initially, teams didn't really know how to handle him. But I think as teams got a little bit of tape on how he wants to win as a rusher, as he figures things out himself, they basically took everything away from him. And he was a very mediocre pass rusher after kind of bursting onto the scene and being like, oh God, is this going to be the next Micah Parsons? And this is going to be a thing where we just take athletic linebackers and turn them into edge rushers? At the height of this thing, week 4 was kind of where they first put him out there as a starting edge. He got bodied against the Raiders, actually, but against Indianapolis, week 5, one of the best pass rush performances of the year. 10 pressures, 2 sacks, was just working those guys. The week after that, had 3 pressures and a sack against the Chargers. But from that point on, really inefficient as a rusher. But another full offseason to develop as an edge. The tools are there. Arrow, I do think, is pointing up. You'll love seeing those flashes from him. Just has to continue finding his identity as a rusher as he refines his pass rush package and his pass rush plan. Very similar with Nick Bonito. As I mentioned, this is one of the most, if not the most athletic edge duos in the league. Nick Bonito, my pro comp for him coming out of Oklahoma a year ago, he was a second-round pick, was, I kid you not, a literal ball of lightning. Just unhinged, explosive energy with no plan at all. That's the best way I can use to describe what he is. You watched his rookie tape in the NFL, and you saw some of those flashes with the speed and the bend and the inside bend and quickness to just warp around offensive tackles. The sky's the limit for him, but he's got to learn how to, package rush moves together to have a pass rush plan. Would love to see him add some semblance of power, and his get off is just inconsistent. You can see him fly off the ball and win the edge before the tackle gets to his second step, but you can also see him slow off the ball. And if you're not, packaging get off with timing and hand placement, you can't convert speed to power and threaten tackles with the threat of a bull rush. So definitely development is needed for Nick Bonito, but it's going to be an interesting rotation to me, and Jonathan Cooper too, who's I think capped out as a quality kind of third edge type, good run defender, not the most useless pass rusher in the world, just doesn't have all of the physical tools. But I think this is going to be a literal 5-man starting rotation, where on big have-to-have-it third downs, it's going to be Randy Gregory and Frank Clark. Earlier downs, Jonathan Cooper's definitely going to be out there with some combination of everybody else. And in terms of overall snap counts, I think you're going to get everybody playing about 350 to 400 snaps. So I don't think any of these guys are going to have huge years, but can the group as a whole just be okay? Yeah, probably. But it's not a super dangerous edge group. It's one of the lower ones in the league for sure. As far as the rest of the depth on the edge, Aaron Patrick, Thomas Incoom, low-level investment types. I did like Incoom out of Central Michigan. It's kind of a weird build. He's kind of carved out his own unique rushing style, but he's instinctive. I'd keep an eye on him if he makes this team to be a rotational piece for them. But then you go to the interior, and it's one of the deeper interior defensive lines in the league. Like, I'm in a weird way kind of excited for this group, just because I think there's going to be 4 or 5 guys here that are capable NFL players. Your 2 starters are Zach Allen and DJ Jones. So let's start with Zach Allen. They gave him a 3-year, $45 million contract. There is an out after the second year. More like 2 years, 30, give or take. But I did think it was a little bit of an overpay, and I like Zach Allen. I always have. I even was too high on him coming out, but he's turned into a capable player. Athletic guy for an interior defensive lineman, was an edge in college. Still, the one thing about Zach Allen is you think the arrow is still pointing up. This is kind of like when the Eagles signed like Jordan Mailata or Josh Sweat, where you're hoping the growth continues. And if it does, that's great for Zach Allen, but it's not a guarantee. You're paying him for his potential, not necessarily what he did last year. A lot of flashes last year. He can win with quickness. He's got a lot of different rush moves. He's got decent power. He really came along as a run defender last year, where it's been an issue for him because of his play strength, being a former edge player. So, Vance Joseph obviously likes him. He's going to be a capable rusher for sure. I don't think he's going to be quite as good as Draymond Jones, but I do think it's comparable. I can see how they arrived at the decision to just get a little bit cheaper with Zach Allen. So we'll see if he continues to develop or if this just kind of is what he is. If this is what he is, probably a slight overpay. But you did need someone else that can get after the quarterback. Really, you needed anybody, because it's not like DJ Jones is a great pass rusher. He's more of the tough run defender. Another one of these guys that is asked to play the nose, but doesn't have, he's not 325 pounds. He's not 330 pounds. So if he faces hard double teams against inside zone or duo, he's naturally going to give up some ground in a way that, maybe Vita Vea or Dexter Lawrence won't. So when you look at like his run defense grades, for example, for PFF, that's where he'll get dinged. But that's a role thing, not like how good is DJ Jones against the run. As a 3 technique, love DJ Jones as a run defender. But how often is he playing 3 technique? We'll see. As a rusher, he's fine. Just kind of a ball of energy that hasn't always been able to know when to go to what, but he's got a little power, got a little bit of quickness. He's a good player, not a game changer. Now, I said I was kind of excited about this group. It's because of the depth. You got Mike Purcell, who, when this team does want to go to 5-man defensive lines, Purcell can play the nose. He's been doing this for years and years and years. One of the better years of his career last year. Like, he has that energy and the size and the play strength to defend the run from the nose. So you love that for what he is. And then I was going through these guys and I was like, oh, Jonathan Harris? Yeah, I kind of like what he did last year. Matt Henningsen, kind of like what he did as a 4-eye for them last year. Oh yeah, they have Ayama Uwazurike as a young player with some upside that came on late last year. PJ Mustipher, another undrafted pickup this year, who I compared to Daquan Jones, who came out of Penn State as well. He's been a good run defending kind of nose tackle type in the NFL. Has had some good years with the Titans and the Bills, but he also was, I think I already said that, but out of Penn State, a 4th-round pick. I thought Mustipher should have been a day 3 pick because I think he's going to be able to defend the run at the next level. One of the worst athletes at the defensive tackle position in the draft, but I think it's there for him to be a capable run defender, just as I do with, all these guys. Harris and Henningsen are more of those kind of 3-4 end types where they're not big-bodied guys, but they're quick and can hold their own from a 4-eye usually. Harris can probably play 3-tech. And then Uwazurike as a kind of understudy to Mike Purcell, who can, get into this rotation. He's got a lot of tools as well. All these guys are run defenders, though. So, that's solid. Rotational depth, you want to prioritize them being run defenders, and then you can get your pass rushers in there on pass rush downs. But there's not a whole lot of, upside or anybody that you're thrilled about here. But I think this is one of the deepest interior defensive line rotations we've seen. And that it honestly doesn't even stop there. There's other guys on this roster that I think, teams should have their eyes on. In terms of who gets cut here. I'm just pulling it up right now. Because Tyler Lancaster's here. Elijah Garcia got some snaps from him last year. Jordan Jackson's here, who was a developmental tweener type out of Air Force, but a really productive pass rusher. Like, there are a lot of guys on this interior defensive line. And, man, there's going to be like 9, maybe 10 players here that get significant snaps as a giant rotation here. They're going, RBBC is running back by committee. They're going D-line by committee at edge, at interior. So it's going to be a serviceable NFL group. I have them ranked 27th in pass rush in a league where a lot of teams are prioritizing pass rush. I wouldn't say the Broncos have put a huge priority on pass rush. And then D-line run defense is solid, ranking 24th with some of that depth, the rotational pieces they have. DJ Jones, I think, is a good 3-tech. But, overall, if there's going to be a problem on this defense, it's going to be the defensive line. And I don't think that's really controversial to say at all. I think they do kind of drag them down a little bit because the rest of this roster is pretty damn good. As we look at the linebackers, pretty good is borderline for this linebacker group. I love these guys in run defense. They rank in the top half for me, 13th in linebacker run defense. Coverage, they definitely leave a lot of athleticism on the table with Josie Jewell and Alex Singleton. Singleton especially, who just cannot really turn and run. He is a straight line, narrow-laned linebacker, but when he's on that lane, he's effective and a freaking piss missile of a maniac at linebacker. He's a really good run defender. So Singleton does a lot of the heavy lifting. Not that Jewell's a bad run defender, but Singleton carries a lot of weight for why these guys are really good against the run. Josie Jewell, on the other hand, is a much more balanced linebacker. He's a much more smooth athlete, and he's really an instinctive coverage player. Every year, it feels like Josie Jewell has 3 or 4 plays from zone coverage where he's manipulating the quarterback instead of the quarterback manipulating him, almost like baiting quarterbacks into throws. Picked off Mahomes a couple times last year. And it's not just when he makes plays on balls. Like, he does feel out zones really well. He navigates his way into the direction of where the quarterback ultimately ends up looking. So I really love his zone IQ. But the problem is, because he's a pretty good zone player, they end up putting him in a lot of difficult coverage assignments, unlike what they do with Singleton, where Singleton, it's like, okay, you're playing a short hook, you're playing the flat, or you're off the field on passing downs, or you're blitzing, or you're playing a QB spy. They're like, you're doing the easy stuff, you're staying down low. But Jewell, like I said, Vance Joseph was at the top of the league in cover 2 last year. If they want to do that again, Jewell's going to be the guy that is having to run up the seam with slot receivers and tight ends. Or he's going to be the guy in cover 3 that's turning his head and trying to pick up a crossing route. The Cardinals ran the most cover 3 in the league last year. So, like, they will put a lot of pressure on Josie Jewell's plate as a coverage defender because he does have those flashes. But, he was 9th in the league in yards allowed per PFF in coverage last year. And he just, while he's fluid, he's got smooth hips. He can turn and run, but he can't run very fast in a straight line. So the longer he has to cover guys up the seam or on a crossing route or, God forbid, a post or a wheel route, like, he will lag behind and give up some pretty big plays. So that's where he gets dinged as a coverage player. He's a good run defender, sees the field really well, but, not the strongest play strength, not the fastest guy to the ball, but overall has that discipline and a relatively secure tackler. He did jump up to about 10% missed tackles last year, which is a little bit higher than you'd like to see. But, I think this is a good group as long as they scheme around their skill sets and find ways to protect them in coverage. It's easier said than done, and that's why they rank 27th in coverage, which does ding this team a little bit. But, it's far from the worst position to just have a couple of good dudes that are going to do their job, and you know what you're getting week in, week out. As far as the depth is concerned, Jonas Griffith, very good third linebacker. I think he could start for some teams in the NFL. Physical run defender, decent athleticism, not great coverage instincts. That's why he ultimately was overtaken by Alex Singleton, who's just a much better run defender. But he's started some games for this team. He's good depth. And then they draft Drew Sanders in the 3rd round, who we have to talk about. I mean, I wouldn't have been the least bit surprised if Drew Sanders snuck into the 1st round. Like, I thought he was a much better prospect than like what Quay Walker was for who the Packers took in the 1st round last year. Just so much more untapped potential there. He converted from edge, transferred from Alabama, was a highly recruited guy off the edge, transferred to Arkansas so he could get on the field, and they moved him to linebacker. And before I watched his film, I fully expected a guy that when he dropped into his zones had no idea what he was looking at. And I was so pleasantly surprised. I mean, I saw a guy with active eyes that could really turn and run at 6'4", good speed. The problem with him is run diagnostics. He's new to the position. If you put him out there right now, he's going to be late to the ball way too consistently. And sometimes he's over-aggressive, and he'll lose that discipline and just get washed out. So there's just so much for him to learn at the position. A couple of great mentors here, though. And, the upside's really there. He also needs to clean up his tackling, where I think he missed like close to, it was at least 15% of his tackles, if not 20, at linebacker for Arkansas last year. So a very much developmental piece, but you look at some of the best linebackers in the NFL, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, the list goes on and on and on of like guys that had to come in, work their way up the depth chart, truly learn and understand the position and fight for those jobs, unlike the Kenneth Murrays and Quay Walkers of the world where they're just gifted those jobs right away. I think very highly of what Drew Sanders will be someday, maybe not necessarily this year. Beyond him, you got Justin Sternad, who's maybe going to make this team as a 5th piece for depth, and then just undrafted types. But yeah, I'm really not worried about this group. They have their limitations in coverage. When they have to go against Travis Kelce, yeah, it's, as we've seen, like, you can pick on these guys a little bit in coverage because of the lack of athleticism. That's why they draft Drew Sanders. They're trying to get faster at that spot. But, for the most part, I think they're going to be just fine with these linebackers. In fact, they're an asset in run defense. But then you go to the secondary, which is the best part of this defense, and really their saving grace for why this can be a pretty solid defense this year. Because this is just a really fun group, man. You've got Pat Surtain, which what's not to say about him, right? He's a top 3, 4, 5 corner, whatever you want to say. He's in tier 1 of cornerbacks. I firmly believe that. He elevates everybody else too, because you can leave him on an island in zone coverage and shift everybody else to the other side. You can have him follow around a team's number 1 wide receiver and, just play bump and run man coverage. He's a smart zone guy. He's a smart man guy. He's got the size to play the run. What's not to love about Pat Surtain, man? Let's just wrap this up by saying he's already on his way to being like a Hall of Fame corner. He's that good. You do have some questions after him. Not massive questions, because I'm a little bit higher on Damari Mathis. He was one of my, I'm not going to say best draft takes, but a good draft take of mine. He was a top 10 corner for me in my rookie draft rankings last year. And I don't know how many people had him up that high. Really liked his upside, loved what he showed in press man coverage, loved his physicality to come downfield and blow up swing passes and screens and stuff. What was really fun for me in kind of a mean way with Damari Mathis, and is not a fully mean way. It was just a very satisfying year for Damari Mathis for me as someone that really nailed his evaluation. You can go back to what I said about him in that cornerbacks video, like love his flashes in press man coverage. He had really good reps for this Broncos team. He started like a dozen games for this team and was up and down for sure, as most rookie corners are, but you could see the speed, the sticky man coverage, the size to hang down the field, all there. You also saw the physical run defense that I had on his college profile. But the interesting thing is my biggest weakness on him was when Pitt ran cover 3. He had coverage busts, and he was a lurker. He was overly aggressive and abandoned his assignments a lot of the times. And, you could see it on film where his zone discipline isn't there. It's not there yet. It is a coachable thing, but if Vance Joseph wants to run anywhere close to 50% or even 35% cover 3, they got to teach Damari Mathis, hey, you can't let guys over your top in cover 3 because that leads to massive coverage busts. This play against the Chiefs, a great example, just isn't anticipating a crossing route that if Mahomes saw this, could have been a touchdown. So, like, got to coach that up, got to coach some of that zone discipline into him. He'll get better and better in man coverage, where I think he's already pretty good. And between Mathis and Surtain, that's why I think Vance Joseph will go to a lot more man coverage, because he can, which he couldn't do last year with, Hamilton and Marco Wilson and Byron Murphy. God bless his soul. He's not the best man corner. So I like this group. I like their upside a lot. I really think Damari Mathis next to Surtain can be another guy that, Miners is my number one breakout for this year, but Mathis would be my defensive breakout for this team. I was a big fan of him coming out. Maybe that makes me biased, but keep an eye on Damari Mathis for sure. Then you got another one of my dudes, K'Wan Williams. Loved this signing, man. I thought he was a huge loss for the Niners when they let him go, because he is, I think, the most psychotic run-defending slot defender in the league. And in a league where everybody wants to live in nickel, a lot of teams want to run quarters. Well, even though I don't know that they're going to lean heavily into that here, it was much more in Ejiro Evero's scheme. But you'd need that slot corner that can function as like a strong safety or a linebacker, even in K'Wan Williams' case, like not afraid to thump into offensive linemen and get nasty in the trenches. And K'Wan is so effing good at that, it's not even funny. He's a decent coverage player, not the fastest guy, not the quickest reaction time, not the smartest zone player. He'll give up some plays, but he'll make some plays. As a slot corner, I think he's still one of the best in the league. So if Damari Mathis can solidify himself as a quality starter, you've got a really good trio of corners there. Honestly, potentially one of the better ones in the league. The depth is very mediocre. Honestly, the first guy in I expect to be Riley Moss, their third-round corner here. First white corner in the NFL in a long time. A lot of people have kind of said, he should be a safety at the next level. I disagree. I think he's got the speed, the fluid athleticism. Really loved him in his zone-heavy system, whether it was a cover 3 scheme like this or a quarters-heavy scheme. If Mathis really struggles, I think they'll go to Riley Moss, and we'll see what he can do. I never really saw immense upside for him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he turns into a solid number 2 opposite of Pat Surtain. So I like that pick. We'll keep an eye on him if he gets an opportunity this year. They gave Tremon Smith actually a very sizable contract, mostly for special teams, but he did start 4 games for Houston last year and played pretty well. So he's an athlete. He's bounced around positionally. Teams have even flirted with him as like a running back. He's just that good with the ball in his hands. But if obviously the athleticism is there. If something's clicked in coverage later in his career here, there could be a decent player there. I guess someone to maybe keep an eye on. Isang Bassi, low-end slot corner depth. Always kind of viewed him that way. It's how he played last year. Jaquan McMillian, was not familiar with his game at all, was an undrafted rookie last year, but did start the final game of the year for them and played really quite well. The Chargers were really going after him, and he held up. Literally saw 11 targets, and it did give up 5 for 70 yards, but not the worst performance for an undrafted rookie in his first game where teams are really going after him. So we'll see if he makes the team. Maybe there's something there. I don't know. Faion Hicks was also a 7th-round pick last year that didn't get on the field, who I didn't watch. But, it's not the best cornerback depth. You really need K'Wan to stay healthy, which isn't always the case with him, because then you're getting into a lot of question marks. But I like the starting 3 quite a bit. But then you go to the safeties, and you got Justin Simmons. Broncos fans are always like trying to throw in Justin Simmons' name when I'm discussing who the best safeties in the NFL are. I don't think he's quite on those top 4 guys. Minka, Bayard, Derwin, and Jesse Bates. I don't think he is elite in coverage like maybe Minka and Bates are, and I don't think he's an elite run defender like Derwin is. And I think Bayard's just a little bit better at everything than Justin Simmons. But after those 4, you want to throw Justin Simmons in the mix? Sure, I'm cool with it. He's really consistent in coverage, not the fastest player. So in like a quarters heavy system like last year where he had to turn and run with real deep threats, yeah, he would trail behind a little bit. That's where I think the difference in the coverage ability is noticeable, but it's minimal. Like, he's got great anticipation time, really understands his assignment, whether he's playing down in the box, playing free safety, playing quarters, buzzing down, he's great. Like, he can do everything. He can line up in the box. Very interested to see what role Vance Joseph has in mind for him. And just the safety group in general. They do bring back Kareem Jackson, and I kind of struggled with, some of these deep dives. I list 6 starters. I'll list a dime back. In a Fangio style scheme in Avero's defense last year, that kind of split safety, rotating safety, up and rotating in the sense of going up and down, not like rotating players on and off the field, but it was really Kareem, Justin Simmons as the safeties with 3 defensive backs and 2 linebackers, like base nickel defense pretty much all the time. Now with Vance Joseph, I'm curious, like, does he view Kareem Jackson as his best option as a safety? Because in a quarter system, Kareem Jackson's really nice. He's got those cornerback hips. He can turn and run. He can crash downfield quickly, willing defender against the run. But if this is going to be a lot of cover 3, do they actually just think Caden Stearns is their starting safety, where both Simmons and Stearns can play a little bit more free safety in a way that an aging Kareem Jackson can't? Maybe can play a little bit more strong safety with a little bit more size than Kareem Jackson. And in which case, does Kareem Jackson just become that dime back, kind of that PJ Williams role, as I will, that I keep referring to, as a guy that plays a little slot corner, a little buzz safety, a little too high? I really wanted to put Caden Stearns up there as a starter because I do think he's probably going to end up being the better safety in Vance Joseph's scheme. But how much of that is a projection? Like, they did bring Kareem Jackson back here. We'll see how it all plays out. I like Caden Stearns. I like the flashes he's shown, especially in a cover 3 system. And I think in more of a Fangio style defense last year, like I said, like, Stearns is more of a north and south athlete. He doesn't have those lateral skills to flip his hips and convert into man coverage from quarters like Kareem Jackson does. So we'll see what happens there. Both, I think, are solid options that I don't expect superstar seasons or anything like that. Kareem Jackson just keeps on going. He was fine last year. But regardless, something to keep an eye on. PJ Locke, decent special teams depth. He's played a lot of snaps for this team and hasn't been horrible, like truly horrible when he's been on the field, but just really inconsistent in coverage. Turner Yell, I did like in a quarters system with I'll just keep reiterating, the fluid hips and ability to turn and run, which is probably the number one thing you look for a high-end upside at safety in a quarters heavy system, but not quite sure how he'll fit in here. And then they have J.L. Skinner, who they draft late in this draft out of Boise State, I think 6th round, tore his pec, really testing my memory banks here, but not going to be available to start the season, but probably not going to miss the whole year either. Skinner was a beloved draft prospect by many. I had some issues with his lateral ability. I don't know if he's ever going to be a dominant coverage player, but my pro comp for him was Rashawn Jenkins as a north and south safety who can either play a strong safety in a cover 3 defense or even a little bit of free safety with some north and south speed. So I like his long-term projection in this system. I think between Skinner and Stearns, you're going to get a good number 2 safety by 2024. But as far as if that's going to happen this year, maybe Kareem Jackson gets in the way of that for a year. I don't know. Overall, they rank 11th in DB coverage, and they're a tier 2 DB run support team, which is like towards the top, tied for 4th in the league. with 7 other teams. But, K1's a freak. Patrick Surtain is a very good run defender. Damari Mathis does need to clean up his tackling. If he can do that, he's a potentially there's so many. It's hard to rank run defending corners, but he is a maniac, just like K1 Williams. These guys will hit you if you try to throw to the flat. I love that about Damari Mathis. But Justin Simmons as well, very consistent run defender. So they got a bunch of dudes that are going to close and finish the job against the run. To wrap up the whole defense, it's a balanced unit. They rank 22nd. There's just not a ton of insane difference makers here outside of Patrick Surtain and Justin Simmons. Good players for sure. But you look at the front 6. It's funny, we're all catered to say front 7, but it's a front 6. Let's be real. It's just such an average group. It's just hard to be a high-end defense when you don't have a fear factor about you, and I just don't think this Broncos defense has that. I think they're well coached. They're very well balanced. They're going to be solid against the pass, mostly because of that coverage unit doing a lot of the heavy lifting there, but I do think that pass rush is going to provide some complications for them. And run defense, I think they're very solid. The D-line doesn't have any difference makers against the run, but it's deep, and the linebackers are really good. It's going to be a really well-coached defense, not an amazingly coached defense. I think it's just a very solid defense. But obviously, ranking 22nd in defense, if this team's going to sneak into the playoffs, they're going to need probably that offense to be a little bit better than 17th. They don't need to be top 10, but can they be the 12th best offense this year if Russ gets back to good old Russ and Sean Payton's calling great plays? I think that would do it, and that would be their path to maybe, 10 wins and meeting expectations. Until we see that, again, they come in 19th in my power rankings. Technically speaking, they come in 20th. The DeAndre Hopkins signing did change things for the Tennessee Titans, who rank just above this Broncos team now. So that muddied up the rankings a little bit. As far as the timing of this, I wanted to just reveal the Broncos at 19, and then moving forward, you'll see them at 20 in the graphics. I know it's a little bit complicated, but it's the best way I could find to do it, because I wanted to be genuine to where I think the Titans are as well after that big signing. And by the way, it is definitely worth noting that this is going to break into a new tier. The Titans are going to climb up a tier, actually, and the Broncos now kicking this tier off as far as teams that I think are much more legitimate playoff contenders. Obviously, the NFC teams are a little bit jaded because the conference sucks, but, typical teams that I would not be surprised to be capable of being playoff teams with less questions, I think, than pretty much everybody we've discussed so far. Even if they maybe have a lower upside in terms of can they win a Super Bowl. But anyway, the last thing to kind of cover there is special teams, where they do have some questions, right? The kicker, especially with McManus leaving, bringing in Elliott Fry, who's really unestablished as a kicker. If he's okay, it's going to be a fine special teams, but it's definitely questionable coming into the year as far as can they make their kicks. Though I do think they upgraded at punter, and they brought in Tremon Smith as a return man. They have decent players, depth at linebacker, and defensive back to cover kicks. So, I think they can be a solid special teams as long as that also important kicker isn't one of the worst in the league, which right now we don't really know. But let's recap things here with their strengths and weaknesses. I'm cautiously optimistic to leave coaching as a strength. You never know. Maybe Sean Payton's, maybe the league has passed Sean Payton by and this hiring will disappoint. I don't expect that. I think it's going to be a legitimate strength of this team. I think they have a bounty of high-end playmakers. They don't have an elite guy, but I do still look at that receiving group as more of a strength than a weakness, for sure. Even if they only rank 19th, I love the depth that they have and have plenty of guys for a guy like Russell Wilson to get back to something close to his ceiling. I think their offensive line is a really good group. And then, of course, that secondary that we just talked about is really good. Weaknesses, however, pass rush is very bland, and the intermediate pass defense with those linebackers is going to be mostly poor with some splash plays from Josie Jewell. And then, of course, you've got a complete wild card for this team that could either be a strength or be a weakness in Russell Wilson. Had to list him there in his own category because depending on what you get from him, like I said, he's either going to be a strength or he's going to be a weakness. And if he's a strength, probably looking at a team that's in the playoff picture, even in a tough AFC. If he's a weakness, this is going to continue to be a nightmare situation in Denver. But let's look at their schedule to tie a ribbon on all this. And Vegas has their over-under at 8.5 wins, definitely putting a lot of respect on Sean Payton and this Broncos team to be not just a bounce-back team, but be a pretty good team. I mean, in the AFC, that's being a very, like, that's probably being a top half team in the league to get to 9 wins in the AFC. And it's just going to be difficult. I'm not going to say they can't do it, but would I bet on that? Probably not. Like, you're going to need some upsets. I mean, obviously against the Chiefs or at Miami or at Buffalo, which are their hardest games. Those would be great if you could pull upsets off there. But even like, taking one from the Chargers or going to Detroit and winning, Cleveland beating them would be nice. Like, they obviously have a lot of difficult games on their schedule, as do pretty much every AFC team. So I don't think I'm betting the over on this one. I'm not betting the under either, though. Like, I think 8 or 9 wins is extremely likely for the Broncos, and then 10 is going to be like, okay, Russ gets back to his old self, and like this team is in the mix for the playoffs. But there you go. That is my outlook for this Broncos team. I do expect a bounce back season. I think you're going to be, as a Broncos fan, interested in every game that the Broncos play this year through the end. Like, I don't think they'll be out of the playoff picture, worst case scenario, until like week 17. Unlike last year where it was like week 8, you knew the season was done. And then maybe they make the playoffs, maybe they don't. But hopefully you can build things with Sean Payton coming in and really start to feel like, you're a real boy again in the AFC. Maybe the conference lightens up a little bit in upcoming years and they can get back into the mix. But I really hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive. It was a fun one to make, a very polarizing football team. Let me know what you think of their ranking, whether that's at 19 or 20, with DeAndre Hopkins bumping the Titans up a little bit. Let me know about the analysis in general. Comments are definitely appreciated down below, as are likes and subscribes. Hope you're enjoying the series, and we'll be back in a few days with our next one. Peace out.